Okay, we are here for the most frequently asked question. Seriously, this one pops up in my inbox, in the comments, probably even in my dreams at this point, and it's a fair question. A really important one, actually, that gets to the heart of what we're trying to build and how we see the world of scientific research evolving. It's one of those questions that doesn't have a tiny bite-sized answer, which is probably why it keeps getting asked. So we're going to dedicate some real time to it today, to unpack it properly. The question, in its various forms, usually boils down to this: are we against intellectual property rights, copyrights of journals? It's a question that carries a lot of weight, because intellectual property and copyright are in many ways the bedrock upon which the academic publishing world, and indeed much of the creative and innovative world, is built. To suggest we're against them would be a pretty radical statement and frankly a misunderstanding of our entire philosophy and operational model. So let's be absolutely clear from the outset. The answer is a resounding no, but it's a no, and here's why, and here's what we're trying to do. We are here to answer all these questions, not just with a simple yes or no, but with a deeper dive into the nuances, the distinctions that matter, and the vision we have for a more open, yet still protected landscape for researchers and their invaluable data. We want to talk about the role of journals, the nature of data, the rights of creators, and how platforms like RDL can coexist and even strengthen the existing ecosystem rather than seeking to undermine it. So grab a metaphorical cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. First things first, let's talk about journals, academic journals. The peer-reviewed publications that have been the gatekeepers and disseminators of scientific knowledge for, well, centuries. Are we against them? Absolutely, unequivocally not. It's almost absurd to even have to say it, but clarity is key here. Science, as a grand, cumulative, self-correcting enterprise, relies fundamentally on the structures that journals provide. Without them, without that formalized process of scrutiny and publication, the entire endeavor of scientific discovery would look vastly different and almost certainly less robust. Think about what journals. They provide a framework for peer review, a critical process where experts in a field evaluate the methodology, the rigor, and the conclusions of a piece of research before it's shared with the wider world. This isn't a perfect system, no system run by humans ever is, but it's a vital one. It helps filter out error, it challenges assumptions, and it pushes researchers to be as meticulous and as clear as possible. We deeply respect this process and the institutions that facilitate it. Furthermore, journals are the historical record of scientific progress. They are the archives where discoveries are logged, where conversations between researchers across generations take place. When you want to understand the state of knowledge on a particular topic, you go to the journals. They are the bedrock, the foundation upon which new research is built. To imagine a world without them is to imagine a far more chaotic and less reliable scientific landscape. So let us state, for the record, we are not anti-journal. We are, in fact, profoundly pro-science, which means we value the critical role journals play. The publications produced, the articles that fill the pages, both physical and digital, of these journals, are the lifeblood of scientific advancement. Each paper, ideally, represents a step forward, a new piece of the puzzle, a refinement of existing understanding. It's through this iterative process of research, publication, critique, and further research that science actually develops. It's a conversation, and journals are one of the primary venues for that global, ongoing dialogue. Our own work, the very data we're discussing, often finds its genesis or its contextualization within the findings published in these esteemed outlets. So if we're not against journals, what's the point of something like RDL? That's where the nuance comes in. We believe that the current ecosystem, while essential, also has certain limitations, particularly when it comes to the sheer volume and type of data that modern research generates. Journals have page constraints, stylistic conventions, and a focus on narrative and summarized findings. This isn't a criticism, it's just a statement of fact about their current operational model and purpose. They are designed to present the research, the key takeaways. Our perspective is that there is a complementary role to be played, a way to enhance and expand upon what journals already do so well. It's not about replacement, it's about augmentation. It's about providing a home for the things that don't quite fit into the traditional journal article format, but are nonetheless incredibly valuable for the scientific community. Think of it as adding a new, very specific and powerful tool to the scientist's toolkit, one that works in concert with the established tools already in use. Therefore, the idea that we are somehow positioning ourselves as adversaries to journals is a fundamental misreading of our intentions and our operational framework. We see ourselves as part of a larger ecosystem aiming to fill a specific niche that, we believe, will ultimately benefit researchers, the journals themselves by providing citable underlying data, and the progress of science as a whole. Science can develop with the publications produced, and we want to help make even more of the underlying work that leads to those publications accessible and useful. Okay, so if we're on board with journals, what about this copyright issue? This is where things often get a little tangled, but if we break it down, it becomes much clearer. And yes, you absolutely can, and in our view, be able to control and even sell access to your raw data. Let me answer this in detail, because the distinctions here are crucial. The numerical values that you typically see in the graphs or tables presented in journal articles, that is, by and large. Let's state again, for emphasis, they are processed data. What does processed data mean in this context? It means data that has been analyzed, aggregated, synthesized, or selected to illustrate a specific point. It's the output of intellectual labor applied to a larger data set. The choice of what to highlight, how to visualize it, the statistical analyses performed, these are all part of the creative and intellectual work that goes into crafting a scientific paper, and the copyright of that processed data as it appears in the journal article, the figures, the tables, the text, often resides with the journal or is licensed to them by the author, depending on the publishing agreement. We are talking about presenting a point in a study from which millions of data were obtained in a summary table and as processed data. Now, contrast this with the data that RDL is concerned with. The data in RDL is raw data. Let's state again, they are raw data files. And specifically, it is the raw data file or files of the relevant study. Let's state again, they are the raw data file. This is the foundational dataset from which those processed summaries in the journal article were derived. It's the individual measurements, the full spectrum of readings, the complete unadulterated collection of information before it has been curated down for publication. This distinction is absolutely fundamental. So, in conclusion, RDL is not against copyright precisely because we are dealing with a different kind of asset. And here's the kicker: you, the researcher, are the owner of your raw data. Think about it from another perspective, one that's very familiar to anyone in academia. Let's consider the process of publishing an article in a journal. Before you even get to the stage of writing that article, where did the research come from? Do you think that you did not produce that article from a thesis, a larger research project, or perhaps preliminary findings presented at a conference? Of course you did. That article is a derivative work, a specific output from a much larger body of effort and information. Just as you are the owner of the intellectual output that is your thesis or your overall research project, you are also the owner of the raw data that underpins it all. The raw data is a factual record of your experimental or observational work. It's the primary evidence, and ownership of that primary evidence, in our view, unequivocally rests with the researcher. Let's we ask a question, a practical one to illustrate the point. Imagine you've conducted a study with, say, 100 test samples. How many graphs derived from those 100 samples can you realistically present in a single journal article? Maybe you can fit in the data from 10, perhaps 20, if you're really economical with space, and the journal is generous about page limit. But what happened to the data from the other 80 test samples? Is it just lost to the void, sitting on a hard drive, inaccessible to the wider scientific community that might find immense value in it? In RDL, you can at least present the data results of these remaining 80 test samples, making them discoverable and usable. And secondly, I want to ask this: when you did come up with that one graph you provided in the article, didn't you have substantially more data in the background? Did your entire complex study really boil down to just that single isolated data representation? Almost certainly not. There were likely nuances, other variables, more extensive readings that simply couldn't be accommodated within the narrative and page constraints of a traditional publication. At this point, RDL provides you with the opportunity to present your other data for relevant studies that you cannot present in articles, while also importantly helping you earn from the value that data holds. It's about unlocking potential that is currently often untapped. So to wrap this all up, are we against intellectual property rights or the copyrights of journals? As I hope I've made abundantly clear, the answer is no. It's just more complicated than that, in the way that most interesting things are. We believe in the vital role of journals, in the sanctity of the scientific record they maintain, and in the rights of creators. But we also believe that the current system, for all its strengths, doesn't always have a great way to handle the sheer, unadulterated of raw data that modern science produces. Data that you, the researcher, rightfully own. Our goal, then, isn't to disrupt for disruption's sake or to undermine existing structures. It's to add a new layer, a new capability. It's to provide a platform where the vast foundational raw data, the stuff that often doesn't make it into the polished narrative of a journal article, can find a home, can be made accessible on your terms, and can even generate value back to the people who did the hard work of collecting it. It's about recognizing that raw data is an asset in itself, distinct from the processed data presented in publications. Ultimately, we think this makes the entire scientific enterprise stronger, more transparent, and more efficient. It allows for deeper scrutiny, for new discoveries from existing datasets, and for a fairer distribution of the rewards of research. It's about empowering individual researchers and fostering a more complete picture of scientific endeavor. And that, I think, is an idea worth exploring. My name is Raw Data Library, and don't forget to be awesome.